At the end of the day, everything needs to be rooted in evidence, in scientific underpinnings. And as the gap between climate science and investing, as trillions of dollars are being allocated to these climate solutions, it was very evident that there was very sparse, inconsistent, lack of quality data around the climate elements and the ability to translate it into a context that helps financial decision makers, make better bets on the future.
And hello, my friends, and welcome on board. My name is Derrick Fennell, and I'm your host on the Next Gen podcast. And you're right on time for takeoff, so take your seats, fasten your seatbelts, and sit back and enjoy the flight on the Next Gen podcast. Welcome on board. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Next Gen Podcast 1, the platform where business, impact, and forward-thinking strategy come together. I'm your host, Derrick Fennell. And before we dive in, I want to ask you to like, subscribe, and share this episode. Those actions really matter. And when you like and subscribe, it tells YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify that this conversation is valuable. So it reaches more founders, leaders, and change makers. And when you share, you help important ideas reach the people who need them most. And today's guest is someone working at the intersection of business, impact, and intentional decision making. Noah Miller is the founder of Rho Impact, where he helps organizations align strategy, measurements, and purpose so their work creates real measurable outcomes, not just good intentions. So Noah, welcome to Next Gen Podcast 1. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Derrick. Excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you here with us. And so Noah, we're going to start right at the very beginning here. So let's start with your journey. What drew you into impact-driven work and ultimately led you to create Rho Impact?
Yeah, well, they say big problems draw problem solvers. So I suppose, I've always been interested and compelled by big problems that require big solutions. And as I got into, the business world, there was a clear recognition that big problems are big opportunities, and big opportunities are big commercial opportunities.
Okay.
Really it was not an intentional career route. It's really just following the internal compass. Luckily, we're in a time where there are a lot of big problems to solve. Luckily or unluckily, we got big problems to solve and we need better solutions to address them.
Okay.
And what better than the business community to commercialize those solutions.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. Now, was there a moment when you realized that impact needed to be treated with the same vigor or rigor as revenue?
I think there's not a single moment, Derrick, because it's something that I had always been a little skeptical of going through, schooling and going into the corporate world, was around the sophistication and credibility around these claims that companies were making around what they're doing, what are the implications for the industry in the future. And there was always squishy data and unsubstantiated, grandiose claims. So it seemed to me that it was, as folks were getting more and more into marketing around these claims and selling more product around these claims, that there was a responsibility to have better data and better substantiation for these long-term outcomes that companies were putting out there in the market.
Okay.
Yeah, so not a single moment, but just a sort of collection of consistent experiences that saw this was a major gap in the market and major risk, quite frankly, to the market.
Okay. So now, how did your early experiences shape the way you approach strategy and measurement today?
Yeah, well, I would say at the end of the day, everything needs to be rooted in evidence, in scientific underpinnings. And, as the gap between climate science and investing, as trillions of dollars are being allocated to these climate solutions, it was very evident that there was very sparse, inconsistent, lack of quality data around the climate elements and the ability to translate it into a context that helps financial decision makers make better bets on the future. So it was a real recognition of huge data gaps, huge amounts of money being allocated, and the need to provide better data to essentially have a line of sight into how effective are these long-term investments we're making for the planet, for our returns, and for the local communities where we all live and operate.
Hey, now for someone first hearing about you or first hearing about Rho Impact for the first time, how do you explain exactly what you do?
So we take technical climate data and translate it and structure it in a way that financial decision makers can use when planning for the future. So technical climate data, structured and contextualized for financial decision making. In our view, this has been the major gap and the major challenge as world leaders, governments, corporations, financial service providers, the largest banks in the world are needing to plan for this 2050 future and really needing to have, quite frankly, the confidence to allocate the right capital to the right climate solutions. So that's what we're really solving for. Better data for better financial decision-making regarding climate.
Okay. Now, who do you typically serve? Foundations, social enterprise, corporations, or mission-driven organizations?
I would say everyone across the climate, the climate capital stack. So everything from a institutional investor that is looking at direct investments, funds of funds, projects, different asset classes, all the way to the startups that are trying to get funds to scale their climate solutions. So it's really become this core data infrastructure that we're working on that connects the innovators to the general partners, the VC funds, the folks that are investing in them, all the way to institutional capital that are allocating billions of dollars to climate solutions and needing to have a clear line of sight into how good are these investments going to be on the climate and decarbonizing every industry practically, while still having some returns, that at the end of the day, still have to make the return. Really better insight into the effectiveness of the solution in solving the climate problem.
Okay. Now, what problems are your clients usually facing when they first come to you?
So typically, right, you see the headlines. This got, 20 commitments from this major bank or investor. This major government, we're going to have 2040 emissions-free infrastructure. All of these long-term commitments, goals, pressures. The major barrier to a lot of these have been a lack of quality data on how do we pick winners and losers when we don't understand the mess of data. How do we translate life cycle analysis stages to inform market opportunity and penetration? So it's really around taking the technical science and making it commercially usable in a way that informs better decision makers by capital allocators across the capital stack.
Okay. So now, why is measuring impact so challenging for organizations?
There are a few. It's such a great question, Derrick, because that is, perhaps the name of the game. One, there's always been this, data challenge, right? Where how do we know what's going to happen in the future when industry dynamics are changing, future climate scenarios are changing? How do these solutions, when they're applied in this industry, how effective are they going to be in decarbonizing that industry? All of these questions really need to be answered with ground-up data, structured in a way for top-down decision-making. So that's been a way that we've been able to really take real-world economic data, ground-up data from the innovators that are bringing these new solutions to market, and structuring it in a way that folks who are allocating billions of dollars across many different investments are able to have some way to compare how effective is this going to be in contributing to these net zero commitments we have, or the decarbonization goals of our municipality that we're allocating capital on behalf of. So it's really the data quality from the bottom up needed for these long-term macro decision-making on where to put our dollars and why, and having some line of sight into how good it's going to be in addressing the climate, both the emission levels and resilience that's going to be required as the world just gets more volatile as we head to 2050.
Now, so what's the risk of doing this good work without clear metrics or strategy?
Well, Derek, the biggest risk is we lose all of the funding and we lose all of the movement. I mean, the real risk is just trillions of dollars allocated to climate solutions that either don't work, are not scalable, or are based on essentially secondary data or no data. So it's kind of like we need to solve for this data question today in order to make the investments in the future that are going to enable us to maintain a working economy, geopolitical stability, all of these things that the experts out there have said the world will collapse by 2050 if we don't do this and get in front of this.
Okay. So how does clarity in goals change how organizations allocate their time, money, and people?
Yeah. Well, it's such a great question, Derek, where, another barrier on that note, and you mentioned people, is really just there is a recognition of a green skills gap in the market because all of these issues that used to be really peripheral to core business were really, in the environmental science wonks are really fundamental business issues today. We're going to be living in an economy with less natural resources, more dirty, just dirtier, hyper transparency and regulation. Everybody that is operating in the economy is going to have to account for these things as we move towards this dirtier, more scarce, hyper transparent future economy.
Now, so how do leaders balance their mission with operational reality?
Yeah, well, that's another great question, right? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good a forecast is for the future, it's execution today, right, to get there. And I would say back to the data quality and the green skills gap, bad data, and then, folks being tasked with interacting with that data that have never had to solve for these problems before. When you combine those two, we have a lot of wasted time, a lot of wasted resources, and just bad bets. So folks that have climate commitments and pressures, allocating capital to things that there isn't great confidence it's going to work and it's going to do, what we're intending it to do. So it really helps, I think, with the confidence and the consistency and clarity for decision makers that need to make major bets on where to allocate capital, especially public capital, with those kinds of accountability measures, and being able to demonstrate this is based on ground up data on how this will be in a future where we're going to have just more volatility and need better confidence in order to actually act. So it's really on that our long-term future depends on the decisions we make today, and we need better data for those decisions.
Now, what leadership behaviors most influence long-term impact?
Derek, I think right now, especially on the impact side, right, when we're living in a world with, real perhaps the greatest polarization, in history or in memorable times, that if this stuff is part of your commercial business, it's part of your strategy, you are going to be successful. If you are doing sustainability work, talking about the climate in a way that is purely a compliance, a risk management, a reputation management standpoint, you're essentially a tourist in the sustainability space as it relates to your business. You're going to be the first off the bus. You're a tourist, you're going to be off the bus when the weather gets bad. But if this is embedded in your corporate strategy, your company culture, the way you go to market and the way you see the market opportunity, it has to be fully embedded and integrated. And I think it's those companies, those leaders that are going to be the winners in the transition to a low carbon economy, because they see the writing on the wall and they know this stuff doesn't go back, the toothpaste doesn't go back in the tube as it relates to climate. It's only going to get worse. And that has to be part of the future of business.
Okay. So how do you see the impact of AI with climate change?
So it's both a huge, potential risk and opportunity, right? There's a real balancing act when, you have studies coming out saying AI is, going to gobble up all the energy and in turn generate way more emissions because of the AI energy demands. And then on the flip side, there's a lot of data that shows, and that is substantiated by our platform as well, around AI-enabled technologies actually being critical to decarbonizing industries and being able to account for all of the moving pieces needed to have a low carbon industry in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So long way to say, I think it's really going to depend. It's like whoever wields the tool. It can be with a hammer, you can build things or you could kill someone, right? It's a similar, I think, double-edged sword where folks that are deploying AI trained on good data are going to be, solving for these problems. AI on its own, without that good bottom-up data and that intent, I just see it, quite frankly, making it increasingly more complicated because of the amount of hallucinations and the amount of just, I'd say, not verified and very accurate outputs at times. So that's why, this work that we're doing is trying to provide the underlying data so that whether you're deploying it, directly using the data, or if you're training your own AI models on it, that essentially everything is being trained on the best possible data from the real economy, from real solutions being brought to market.
Okay. So can you share an example where improved clarity and measurements led to significantly better outcomes?
Yeah. So I would say, many of our clients find us because they have these, either externally placed upon them climate commitments and goals, or it's part of their thesis on seeing, there is a commercial opportunity in decarbonizing heavy industry. And whether we start working together on, this work happens on the front end in due diligence, or as they're supporting their portfolio companies and going to market and entering new markets, having better line of sight in how effective is this thing we're bringing to market going to be in this industry compared to this industry, has really just opened up market potential. And we've seen it in terms of clients of ours winning game-changing bids because they can connect the dots between their offering, the value and use, and this whole decarbonization climate contribution. So they're able to really demonstrate the commercial value and the climate value for buyers. And all of that comes from this data and interacting with these insights.
Okay. So what kind of transformation do clients experience once they see their impact more clearly?
Yeah, well, it's been pretty remarkable from a, use the word transformation from a company transformation standpoint where, I'm going to start with the softer areas because I do believe in it culturally. I mean, what an amazing cultural boost when you find out the products that you're working on are going to have a dramatic impact on society and the planet. I mean, talk about getting your team fired up. Secondarily, it enables folks to be able to do things like, if you're selling to enterprise buyers, you better have that climate data ready to demonstrate how you are a better and more sustainable version compared to a conventional offering on the market or another vendor. All the way to managers of funds that are competing for institutional capital and need to demonstrate you have these decarbonization goals and commitments. Let me show you how my allocations are going to contribute to that because of this data quality and consistency. It's been really impactful commercially. And then from the climate standpoint, it's like, if the better solutions are getting more money, more funding, more exposure, that's better for, everybody.
Okay. So does your organization work just locally, or are you a nationwide organization, worldwide? How do you operate?
So we are a North American-based firm, completely remote. We have an international client base, so that's been really helpful in helping us to see the core sort of problem across these different segments, different geographies. And it keeps the opportunity we see is across the board, regardless of the type of, the type of financial service provider or the type of company. This information is becoming critical to any commercial transaction as these regulations around transitioning to a low carbon economy go into effect. So it's sort of like, you may not be concerned about climate, but if you're concerned about getting big capital and big customers, you better have your climate data in story airtight. And that's how our data also supports, folks that are needing to do all those activities without being, a environmental scientist or technical expert.
Okay. So now how do you help organizations stay aligned as they grow?
So the role that we play on that is really, I would say, around being the data infrastructure as they grow, in terms of being able to, as they enter new markets, providing the infrastructure for them to demonstrate what the commercial opportunity and climate opportunities are in different markets, different industries. And it's that kind of commercial intelligence that we see as vital to, at the end of the day, these trillions of dollars going to climate investments. All of that information is required to make these, big decision makers feel confident in that they can act, and that they can act with clarity and confidence and consistency across all these different decisions that they need to make.
Okay. So now one thing we talk about here often at Creative Minds AI is that most organizations don't struggle because they lack effort. They struggle because they lack clarity. Now, how does clarity show up as a prerequisite for the kind of impact work Rho Impact does?
Yeah, so I'd say at the end of the day, there's sort of two responses to that clarity question. One is, that is exactly what we are trying to provide with our data and software tooling, is clarity on the future around these big decisions that need to be made today. And from what kind of clarity does it provide, or what kind of clarity is needed coming into this, is the clarity of recognizing that climate you cannot parse apart climate from the future economy, because everything we do will be influenced by a dirtier, scarcer, rules-based way that has not been in the economy at this point in history, where to enter even certain markets, you better have detailed information on all of the emissions associated with bringing those products to market, embodied emissions. You can't even enter markets without having that info handy. So it's just becoming part of, COGS, right? Where doing business in the future is going to require better climate data on your business. And that's the clarity that we're trying to provide.
Okay, so if a leadership team gained clarity around priorities, assumptions, and direction before execution, how would that amplify the work you help them do?
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, climate change, all this, it can sound pretty science fiction-y, right? In the future where things are wetter, scarier, harder to find, more expensive, it can sound quite fraught. But the confidence that's provided through the work that we do is we're going to be placing these bets today, but it's our children that are going to be dealing with the consequences. It's going to be the next board of directors dealing with the consequences. Now there's line of sight and clarity around the long-term implications as the world changes, that based on the decisions being made today. So point being, better long-term decision-making, more of the right decisions being made because of better front-end data and clarity on those assumptions, inputs, everything you just mentioned.
Okay. Now, for organizations listening who want to improve their impact and strategy, what's the best way to engage with Rho Impact?
Yeah, well, first I would say go check out our tool, www.koi.eco. Sign up and you'll be able to see what I'm alluding to around better climate data for long-term financial decision-making, whether you are a municipal, planning director, or a retail investor thinking about the world you're going to provide to your grandchildren, and how your investments today can make a more commercially, a more climate viable future with some commercial returns. So I would say koi.eco, check out our website, rhoimpact.com, and always would love to speak to anybody interested at the intersection of climate and finance.
Okay. So now what makes your approach different from traditional consulting or reporting frameworks?
Great question. Well, one I would say is the reporting space. It's easier to report, right, when you're doing the things and it's just talking about what you've already done. It's harder to report and reframe minimal action and outcomes. And I think that is critical difference is if you're chasing reporting, you're trying to put out some metrics based on what, GRI, SASB, TCFD, IFRS, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to make better decisions that are multi-year decisions, multi-dimensional decisions, and have significant implications for your business and for the world, that's where our data comes in, where it's really around informing front-end decision-making versus trying to retroactively substantiate that we did a good job on something by having a better report. So, yeah, really on better decisions, not better communications.
Okay. So Noah, if you could leave our listeners with one principle about impact, clarity, or leadership that you believe truly matters, what would it be?
Such a great question, Derrick, for my big passing guidance. I would say at the end of the day, every single person that is running an organization, whether it be a business or a government or a startup, is going to be operating in a very different environment as the years go on. The time to prepare is today. If you are someone that believes in science, believes in numbers, then it's time to start believing in this climate data so that these decisions can be made today before it's too late. I mean, and that's the kind of the brass tacks bottom line is we don't have much time. We got to make better decisions. We've already made a lot of shit ones. Better data, better decision-making, better climate outcomes.
Okay. Well, Noah, I just want to say thank you for the work you're doing and for sharing how strategy, clarity, and measurements can transform and impact. And to everyone listening, if this conversation added value, please like, subscribe, and share the episode. Those small actions help conversations like this reach more leaders and organizations who want to do meaningful work. Well, you can learn more about Noah's work and Rho Impact at rhoimpact.com, RHO Impact, IMPACT.com. And if you're a leader seeking clarity, and before your next strategic move, we explore what the foundation thought the clarity system at creativemindsapp.com, where clarity comes before execution. I'm Derrick Fennell, and this is Next Gen Podcast 1. And until the next time, lead with intention, measure with what matters, and build with clarity. And Noah, you got anything you want to add here at the end?
Yeah. Derrick, thank you for having me. And then at the end of the day, you play how you practice. We got to practice better. So let's get some reps in together. Anyone who is in this space and wants to connect, please reach out. Thank you for having me, Derrick.
And thank you for joining us, Noah. And to our listeners, thank you. And please, again, like, share, subscribe. It's important. And that's how we get this message out to the leaders around the world. Thank you, and have a good day.